So today we're talking about oversharing and impulsive talking, and uh, like social cues and stuff. And so the agenda for today is first, I'm just going to share like a little bit of how it showed up for me, because it absolutely did, and I want to normalize it before we get into it, of just like the ways that it affected me kind of quickly, and that there's a lot of things you can do to work on it. And then as a coach too, it showed up in that way. And then what I'm going to get into is like some examples of oversharing and kind of impulsive talking, why we overshare with ADHD, because it's really, really normal, and then how to overcome it, like some tips like that. So first off, like I guess for oversharing, for me, like even as a coach, right, as like a 30-year-old, what I noticed it when it was like too late. So I'd be talking with coaches and I'd want to connect, and and then I would notice it, and then they'd be the one to end the conversation, and then I'd recognize, oh, they've been shifting in their body language, they've been looking away, they're kind of over it, but it was too late. And then I mean, it goes all the way back to school, and it could be a boundary thing. I remember making jokes that didn't land right, or saying stuff that maybe wasn't the best for the situation, or oh my gosh, my boundaries on sharing like personal stuff was not good at all. As a kid, like I shared way too much, way too fast, like way too deep, and that's okay. Like that's just normal sometimes, I think, anyways. And I think there's an extra element to it that I had, and it's common for ADHD. And then if you're on the autism spectrum as well, social cues can be harder for us to read. There's a lot of different pieces, and so it's like it can make it harder to like make friends or to get invited to things. There were times where I wouldn't get invited to things that coaches were doing, and they liked me and they appreciated me, but I didn't get invited, and it kind of hurt my feelings. And I get it too, right? When somebody overshares and talks too much and takes over the conversation, sometimes it takes up a lot of space in the room, and you really like that person, but you might not invite them. And so that's okay if you experience that. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's all kinds of stuff you can learn. And then there's, again, it's like there's always a silver coin, really, to what we experience. So I know for me, one thing, before I get into some more examples of oversharing, and as a coach too, I would share a little bit too much. 6.5 years ago when I started, shared too much on the call, and I started asking myself, do they need to know this, or am I sharing this for me or them? Yes, this relates. Yes, I'm passionate about it, but is this something they need to know? And that was one thing that helped. And then just working on like my self-esteem and self-worth, because when that was lower, it's like I would try to compensate or try to be really knowledgeable or appear really smart about things or things like that. And really, I was doing it, with the best intentions, and it might not have been helpful or come across a certain way. So if you overshare, or you have impulsive or talking, whatever, yours might show up in very different ways, right? Like we're all so different. That's just for me. I had kind of poor boundaries and got super passionate about special interests and just didn't know when to stop talking or read social cues. So it's really normal, and there's all kinds of different factors in there. Another thing that I learned before going into the examples of oversharing is that the person who talks the most does not control the conversation, right? It's the person who asks the most questions. And so when you're on appointments or with clients, because I'm going to talk about that as well, that's really what it is. It's you want them talking. That's fine. They can talk the most. That's fine. It's you're guiding the conversation. You're steering it with questions. And we'll talk a little bit about like a listing presentation, because that I think needs to look very different than some ways it's portrayed. So I'll get to that as well. So here's some other examples of oversharing. So first, if you're doing a first meeting, if you're meeting somebody for the first time and you deep dive into personal struggles or family issues, instead of maybe like getting to know those basic things like where do you live, what's your job, what do you, those kinds of things, sometimes we can divulge too much too fast. However, if we can also get really deep really quick and build rapport. So it's not always a bad thing. It's more of like the person on the other end. Are they appreciating it? Is it helping them? Is there consent between two parties, or are you oversharing and they're not reciprocating, and inside they might think, ooh, this is too much, So that's the kind of stuff we're going to be looking for and watching for. Because again, also, I can go on a listing appointment and within an hour, they're, crying and hugging me, and they're never going to go with anybody else for the rest of their lives because we've gone straight to the core of things and built rapport. So that's awesome. And we have that ability too. It's more of like having control over it and discernment over it versus just, because I mean, does anybody else struggle with small talk and stuff that doesn't really matter? Right? Duh, right? So we're also not going to want to do that. Like, oh, what do you think about the weather? Oh, how did you choose to get a standard poodle over a mini poodle? Tell me about, like that stuff might be like just too basic. So again, it doesn't mean, because we can tend to be in black and white, it doesn't mean you've got to go super basic or you can't build rapport or share stuff or connect quickly. It's just paying attention to how it feels in your body and like how the other person is responding. So another example of oversharing would be like at a work meeting, you might share opinions or experiences that might be off topic or maybe not appropriate for what the focus is, and it pulls attention away from what the agenda is or what the main discussion is. And again, there's just so important to know there's a silver lining, because we might think of something that's not happening, but it really solves the issue, or we might take it in a different direction. And so it's, again, this is just having that self-awareness and discernment. And then in social settings, you might recount stories that are too intimate or, private for the level of acquaintance with the group or the type of relationship you have, where they might feel slightly uncomfortable. And then impulsive talking, somebody's talking, we come up with an idea and we blurt it out and we cut them off or we didn't listen. And then we start going on, some topic. And this is all stuff I've done. I just want to throw that out there. And I do it much less now. So why does oversharing occur with ADHD? It's really common with ADHD. So number one, and this is probably the one that I have the most, is if there's a topic of special interest or something you're interested in and someone asks us a question. Right? If it's something you know a lot about or you're interested in, if you ask me about ADHD and real estate, I've really got to be intentional about not oversharing with that. And also, we want to help. We're very altruistic. We want to help. And so if somebody asks us a question about something we know a lot about, it's like, oh my gosh, let me give you everything. You don't have to pay for that. You don't have to go there. You don't have to do this. Let me just give you everything. And it might be too much. It might be more than they need. So here are some of the reasons that we might overshare with ADHD. The second reason, impulsivity. So we have a little bit weaker impulse control. And that could be, we just speak without thinking sometimes, and so we might think of something and then even before the chance to pull it back, it just comes out. And if that happens, just as my therapist taught me, play the oops game. Right? If you do something or you mess up or you overshare, just say, oops, we're human. People without ADHD, people without autism, they overshare. They're impulsive. We're not just this rare breed. Other people do this stuff too. We just might have a pattern of doing it a little bit more. And so impulsivity can be a big part of that. Seeking connection, like we want to connect. And when you share something personal or you share about something you're interested in, like connecting does you might have somebody that you're with that shares something personal and you want them to feel comfortable or like they didn't share too much, and then you might share something back to find common ground or to show them that you empathize. And it could be perfect or it could be a little bit too much, or maybe you just need to hold the space for them in a professional way and you didn't need to share all that stuff because now it might look a little less professional. So that could be something. Difficulty with social cues. So sometimes some of us, we can have more trouble reading social cues and understanding when people are disinterested or maybe just kind of uncomfortable. And we might not notice when it's time to stop talking or when the topic is too personal. And that's something actively in a lot of conversations, just me personally, I'm looking for signs that I've shared too much, especially around special interests. So you can kind of get some of the stuff in your head and then it does get easier and you don't have to think about it as much, because we're also looking for that balance where you're not masking your symptoms. You still get to be authentic And at the same time, you're communicating a way that is helpful and rapport building and, achieves the thing that you're looking to achieve. So the social cues, again, and then if you're on the autism spectrum, which is much more prevalent with ADHD, sometimes our brains can work differently where certain social cues or facial expressions just don't register. And there's actually, if you're in that camp where you literally can't read facial cues, there's so much you can do, even for adults, of kind of cognitively learning what certain faces mean, and what that looks like. So look into that stuff or reach out to me. Next thing is working memory challenges. So have you ever been in a conversation where somebody's talking about something and then something pops in your head that you really need to share and you're so afraid you're going to forget it? You had that? So you repeat it over and over and over in your head so you don't forget, and then you're not even listening. So then some of us just say it out loud because like we don't want to forget it, and it's really important. And so that can totally be normal too, because with our working memory, if we don't say it now, it's gone forever, and it's really important. And so it's like, okay, I'm gonna say it, and then we process fast, we talk fast, we think fast. If a conversation is slow, we might get more restless. And I think somebody made a comment about, do we seek connection more than neurotypical folks? Potentially. I've never been a neurotypical person, but I could, very much so. I could see that being a thing. That would be interesting to ask, because I think the other thing is, have you noticed, like when you have a conversation with someone who has ADHD or neurodivergent versus neurotypical, how you can go faster? It's okay if you interject. It's okay if you're a bit more impulsive. Some of like it gives you energy versus you having to mask your symptoms. Especially, I've got a couple friends that have ADHD and are on the autism spectrum, and I don't have to think about this stuff at all. We just go, because in a neurotypical conversation, when someone's talking and they get bored, they don't typically show it. Now for us, we'll probably just change the topic, or we'll go to something else. And so I think there's this like kind of flow where we can link up as a neurodivergent person, where it's like unspoken, because we can be really intuitive. And so you're talking and the conversation's being flat, or you're tired of something, and then you just go to this new topic and it's boom, boom, boom. And we're over here and we're over here and we come back here and we go here. It just is organic. You don't have to do like the same amount of things sometimes. And so it's good to have friends that are also neurodivergent you can talk to, where you can just let that fly and go. And then it's great to have neurotypical friends as well, because they can slow you down a little bit. They have a different perspective. I mean, I have both, and both are extremely valuable. So yeah, that fast talking, we might be on step 5 and they're still on step 1, and we want to hurry it along. That's really normal. The other thing, this is interesting, I read some about this, is that we can have trouble perceiving ourselves correctly. So it might be that you're not oversharing as bad as you think. You might be much better in social situations than you realize. And when you ask other people, you might just be super hard on yourself. And you ask other people in your life and they're like, no, you don't overshare at all. Oh my gosh, no, I love talking with you. It doesn't drain me at all. So it might be that you actually don't have this as much as you think. I would bet a lot of us might not be as bad at this as we think, if you resonate with it. And it really shows that we have trouble gauging ourselves and how we're perceived. Studies show that as well. And then if you add on, if you have like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? Like a fear of rejection, or fear of rejection on steroids, even if it's neutral, you're going to think even worse, or to the negative. So that's something else to look out for as well. So those are some of the reasons we might. I'm going to go into some of the tips here in a second. With my Cracker Barrel, this is where I slept last night in my RV. I guess you can't see it. Cracker Barrel for the win. There, that's fun. Okay, so here are tips to manage oversharing. So this is really important, is watching for the social cues and the body language. And this is good for like rapport building or conversion anyways with clients. So if you're talking to me and I'm like this, tell me, do you think I'm really engaged, or do you think you might be oversharing? If I'm doing this and I'm over here while you're talking to me and I'm doing like kind of one-word answers and not really paying attention, You think I'm oversharing? Like if somebody was right. So that's the stuff we want to look for. Is like those subtle things. So they start to look away. Are they shifting in their seat? Are their eyes looking away? Are their answers getting more quiet and kind of one words where you're just talking and they're just like, yeah, right. And especially if they're a nice person, it might not be quite as obvious. But if they're not kind of mirror and matching you, if they're not as passionate as you, if they're not sharing kind of the equivalent, if there's a big difference between how much you're sharing and they're sharing, that's an important one to look for. Also, where their body is facing, the body language. So it's like when people are oversharing, and I've had people do this to me too. It's like you kind of feel like you can't get away because we get impatient. So we've had people overshare to us too, where it's like we want to leave, we're done. Like I got it, I got the information. I want to get out of here, right? So watch if their body language is facing the door or a way to get up instead of you. There's subtle hints that they're doing, even subconsciously, that they're ready to be done. And so if I'm however, if I'm, let's say I'm like right super present with you, looking at you, engaged, excited, smiling, you're not oversharing. And you might be talking a lot about your special interest or something you're passionate about. But if I'm still locked in, I might be inspired by it. I might be super interested. I might be learning a ton and really grateful for it. So this kind of like, as they call info dumping, also some people really appreciate, and it's really valuable as well. And it's more about how is the person receiving it. So oversharing or info dumping is not always bad. It's just how does it affect the other person. So the other thing I want to say is with real estate, there's this thing where it's like you got to practice your listing presentation every day or something. You got to role play this certain way. To me, as a coach now for 6.5 years of real estate agents, I have a little bit of an issue with that because everybody's different. And some people are going to want a long version and they need that. And some people are going to want a short version. And some people are going to want you to be animated. And some people are going to want you to be calm because they might get anxiety. So this is where that mirror and matching comes in. And so before you do a presentation, what I'll typically do is, okay, I've got two versions of this. I've got the bullet point version, or I've got the long, more thorough version. Which one do you want? This is buyer agency. This is listing presentations. Because when you go on a listing presentation, you might be able to do it in like 15 minutes. They don't want the long version. But if you're running the same show every single time, you might talk yourself out of a listing because they think, ooh, this person like I'm just impatient. This isn't the right person. Where someone comes in and they're bullet points into the point, they're like, yep, let's go because I need to move fast. So don't do the same presentation the same way every time. Don't do it. Really pay attention to who your audience is. And then with your presentations, as we talked about in the beginning, the person who talks the most does not control the conversation, the person who asks the questions. So this is the other thing I have with presentations and buyer presentations. These are based off conversion rates that are off the chart. The listing presentations that have about 50% engagement of the other person talking, your client, those are going to have higher conversion rates. If you're just sitting there talking at someone and doing it the way you're supposed to do it, which some people do, and neurotypical people are more likely to follow directions, whereas we can see like things that don't work and we change them sometimes, like we can break the rules a little bit. So it's okay to shift stuff if it helps you have a higher conversion. So in your listing presentation, maybe have some more engaging questions, like, maybe you're showing your marketing and then you say, what's important to you in the marketing, right? You can have your same presentation you have already if you have one, and then throw in open-ended questions, not yes or no, open-ended questions. Like, here's the marketing. Like, what's important to you? Here's what we do for open houses. What are your thoughts on open houses? You could just throw little questions in there, and then you're going to get this to more of a 50-50 ratio. And that person is going to feel really heard at the end instead of you just talking at them and giving them a presentation. And you're going to collect all this data. So then when you're going to get the listing signed, you can say, okay, so when we sign this, we're going to do open houses this way because that was important to you. Marketing, I think that's a really good idea. Let's collaborate on that. And then I heard you have a concern about this, and here's what we're going to do for that. And thank you for being so transparent. And I think the world of you. And so, most people sign a listing agreement for 6, 9, or 12 months. What's best for you? Notice I didn't say, do you want to sign a listing agreement? I said, most people sign a listing agreement 6, 9, or 12 months. Which one do you want to do, right? So they choose one, and ta-da, even if they choose 6 months, you have a 6-month listing appointment. So having that engagement and that conversation is so different than like talking at someone. And then mirror and matching with that oversharing. Some people love to talk, others, it might make them tired. So if they're very to the bullet point, expect that they probably don't want you to share a ton of information. If they are also like really to the point, or like want to move fast and you interrupt them, that might be a little bit more frustrating. Whereas if you have somebody that's like very calm and patient, they might do better if they're interrupted, if you say something on impulse. So this is it's really cool because it's like we're learning people. It's like this, and I think with our intuitiveness with this, we can learn people easier and faster than our neurotypical people. Not all, right? But I think as a whole. So you have this special ability, like the sixth sense to plug into of like learning people. And that's why statistically our conversion rates are double that without ADHD. It takes us half the activities for the same amount of contracts. I've seen that for 6.5 years. So lean into that. A couple other tips is pause before speaking. So if you can take a slight pause just to check in, it could be like half a second, and assess whether it's helpful for the or appropriate for the situation. That can be good. Or like I said earlier, is am I saying this for me, or am I saying it for them? You know, is this helpful is this helping them or me? Another thing you want to do is evaluate the trust levels and kind of the relationship. And so you know, assessing how much do you trust the person and the people you're speaking with, because we might overshare to someone who's not a safe person, and that thing might be used against us, or it might not be something that's advantageous, or they might go tell someone else and distort what we said, and it's not good. And we tend to be a bit more trusting. Not all, right, but a lot of us. I think especially when, I mean, I haven't met a person with ADHD or in this community that is like bad or mean or has bad intentions. It's like the opposite. We've got philanthropists, we have people that just like give everything, like we have empathy, we know what it's like to have our time. And so when you don't have that manipulative part of you or those mean parts of you, it's a lot harder to see it in someone else. So we can be overly trusting of people that maybe we need to be just a little bit more cautious, or just let them kind of show who they are a little bit sooner. And so kind of just checking in, is this person someone I know that I can trust, can be helpful too, because you also want to protect yourself. Oversharing isn't just, oh, I'm sharing too much, it hurts them. It's like I might be oversharing information that I need to keep private for myself, because I need to protect myself. And that goes to the next tip, which is setting personal boundaries. So if you're someone, and this is something I had to do, I had not great boundaries, and I would share a lot of stuff, I guess like probably up through my 20s. And so like before you go to a situation, kind of think about the personal information that you are and not willing to share, and kind of have clear boundaries in mind to help you navigate it. So if you're going out with like friends for the first time, that you haven't really met, it's a group of friends and you're excited to know, then you might think in your head, you know what, I'm going to stay more general unless they bring up a topic and it seems really appropriate. So I'm going to not talk about, you know, the multiple surgeries I've had, or that I didn't grow up without a dad and how it affected me, you know, or like stuff like that. Like there's certain stuff that you might just kind of reserve for the second or third conversation or relationship. And if, again, like be intentional before you get into those social situations, if this is something you struggle with. Another thing is determining your emotional state. So be aware of how your emotions influence what you're going to share. So if you have high emotions, either it could be positive or negative, they can lead to oversharing. You know, and you can divulge a little bit too much personal information. If you're really excited, if you're upset, if you're anxious, it can lead to a little bit more oversharing. However, this is where the discernment comes in. We want to watch for the black and white thinking. You might need to share. And it might be a moment where that person really wants to hold the space for you, and it takes that relationship to a new level because you've been vulnerable. And now like you trust them and it's a special bond. So this is not a every situation, close yourself off, don't be authentic, be general. That's not what I'm saying. It's really about like the other person and the consent on their end and what it feels like to them, because our vulnerability can be incredible. And that's why I think part of our conversion rates are so high, because we're not this formal, stiff person. It's like, yeah, I just dropped the kids off. And thank you for, understanding that. And you have kids too. And now we can bond over it and they get it, but we're still staying, appropriate with it. Yeah. And when you're tired, your filters are down. If you've used your fuel for the day, you're more likely to overshare, because we don't have as much impulse control because you've just spent, right? If you've used discipline all day. And then I've just got a few more. I know we're almost at the 30-minute mark. Practice active listening. So active listening is you're basically repeating back what they're saying in a sense. So if somebody says, "Oh, I'm having a hard day," one thing that we can do more as neurodivergents, say, "I'm having a hard day too. Here's what happened." Because we want to connect, we want to find commonality. But for some people, can feel like we didn't hear them, right? Or if they're like, "Oh, my dog just like passed away," it's like, "Oh my gosh, I miss my dog so much too. He was 13 years old and blah, 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 blah." So we've missed that opportunity to help them. And so if we can pause and say, "Oh my gosh, you just lost your dog. I'm so sorry. What do you need right now?" Which I think a lot of us do. It just depends on, I think that's probably not a great example because there's so much empathy in this community. They probably wouldn't do that, but something else, right? It might be somebody's like, "Oh, I just got to listen." It's like, "Oh my gosh, I got this one too," and blah, blah, blah. So we want to practice that active listening where you're validating back what they're saying and you're asking an open-ended question. That's for objection handling too, by the way. Just throwing that in there. If you get a script or an objection that you don't know how to handle, like, it's just not the right time to sell. If you go straight into, "Well, let me tell you why this is a perfect time to sell," you're not active listening. But if you say, "Oh, I'm hearing you feel like it's not the right time for you. Tell me more." "Well, we're going through a divorce." Boom, there's the real objection, right? So if you're not active listening in your conversations, you might be actually missing the real objection and not having as many listings or conversion. And then just a few more. Seek feedback. This is huge. Ask people. If you think you're oversharing, oh my gosh, ask them. Say, "Did I just share too much? Please tell me the truth. You won't hurt my feelings." Because that's a really good gauge, because you're going to be able to get that from other people. And then you're going to actually learn like, "Oh yeah, I was oversharing," or "No, they're actually really interested and I'm assuming the negative and that's not true." Because that's just a great way to do it. So ask people around you that you care about as a sounding board, neurodivergent people, non-neurodivergent people. And then that's going to give you a better, accurate view of like if you're oversharing. And then let's see. And for some people, this is the last one. If you overshare a lot or you talk a lot, some people have a rule that they ask, 2 questions before they share again. So you might have kind of a game you play in your head where it's like, "I'm not going to share until I ask 2 questions." And then they answer it, and then you ask one more, and then you share. So you kind of get a pattern to it. So there's a lot of stuff out there. That is the main content I have for oversharing, impulse, and social cues. So, really, I think kind of the theme, as you've probably heard, is just watching the other person, checking in with them, because sometimes you share and you divulge a lot and it's incredible for the relationship, and other times it might push them away. And there's also beauty in what we call info dumping and how passionate we can get. So yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you everybody for sharing, and yeah, you're just so special. So appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.